Hello, good afternoon everyone, and we are now in the 6th week of our lesson, which is our topic for today is about hyperbola. So we have here an illustrations of hyperbola in real life, and we have here the reflections of light in a lampshade, and we have also here in a basketball. So we are gonna do the shape sang hyperbola. So we have here the Okay, so let's have here a definition of a hyperbola. I have a hyperbola is the set of all points x, y on a plane such that the difference of the distances from two fixed points is constant. We have here the other parts of hyperbola. The focus, which is foci in plural, is the fixed point on the graph. Then the principal axis is a line that passes through the foci. The vertex is a point on the hyperbola that lies on the principal axis. We have the transverse axis is the segment that passes through the vertices with the length of 2a. The center is the midpoint of the transverse axis. The distance between the center and the focus is c unit, with c squared equals a squared plus b squared. And the conjugate axis is a segment with length 2b and it's perpendicular to the transverse axis. So we have here the asymptotes or two diagonal lines where the graph of the hyperbola is approaching. Okay, so we have here an illustrations of a hyperbola showing the parts, the different parts of a hyperbola. Okay, so this is our graph, what we call this branches. And then we have here the vertex, and then the other vertex. We have here the center, and then our fixed point, the focus, then the other focus is here. And then we have the co-vertex, or the endpoints of our conjugate axis. So this segment, this is our conjugate axis, and this segment from the vertex that passes through the center going to the other vertex, that is the transverse axis. And these dashed lines, so may isang aton nga asymptote lines. Now we have here the standard equation of a hyperbola with center at hk is, so we have the quantity x minus h squared over a squared minus the quantity y minus k squared over b squared equals 1 when the transverse axis is horizontal. So, ang posisyon na diya sa aton nga hyperbola, ang ginabasyanta is the transverse axis. So, kung aton transverse axis, nag-horizontal line. So, amin siyang aton nga equation sa hyperbola. And then we have also y minus k squared, the quantity y minus k squared over a squared minus the quantity of x minus h squared over b squared equals 1, where the transverse axis is vertical. So the vertices are a units from the center and the foci are c units from the center, where c squared equals a squared plus b squared. Okay, so let's have here illustration showing the parts of our hyperbola, which is ang halintid sa center going to the other vertex, that is our a units. And then from the center going naman to the other vertex, that is a units. So a plus a, that is 2a. And then c units naman nga distance from center going to one of the foci. So that is c units. Then, from the center, kanto ka naman sa piyak na foci or focus, that is c units. And then, from the center, going to the other co-vertex or the endpoints of our conjugate axis, this is b units. And also sa piyak, that is b units. So, that's why ang aton nga transverse axis, that is equal to 2a, since a plus a, that is 2a. And our conjugate axis is 2b, since b plus b, that is 2b. Okay, so here are some additional notes. The center, foci, and vertices are all on the line containing the transverse axis. Then A is the distance from the center to each vertex, and C is the distance from the center to each focus, while B is the distance from the center to an endpoint of the conjugate axis. So, siya ka ginhatag ko nga illustration atong si A, B, and C. And then C is greater than A, and C squared equals A squared plus B squared. Okay, so we have here the standard equation of a hyperbola where C squared equals A squared plus B squared. So if the equation is in the form of quantity x minus h squared over a squared minus the quantity y minus k squared over b squared equals 1, the center is at hk in the vertices. To solve for the vertices, that is h plus or minus a, then k. Then for the foci, that is h plus and minus c, k. And for the endpoints of the conjugate axis, that is h, then k plus or minus b. And the position of our transverse axis is horizontal. So, nagapahigda. And then, if the equation is in the form, the quantity y minus k squared over a squared minus the quantity x minus h squared over b squared equals 1, and our center is at point hk, and to solve for the vertices, we are going to use h, then k plus minus a, and for the foci, we are going to use h, then k plus minus c. And for the endpoints of the conjugate axis is we going to use the formula h plus minus b then k, and the position of the transverse axis is vertical. So nagapatindo ang aton nga transverse axis. So let's have here an example. Determine the equation of the hyperbola with vertices at 5, -3, and -1, -3, and the focus at 7, -1, then graph the hyperbola. For the solution, plot the 3 points on a rectangular coordinate system. So, aton mga given, kina points, we are trying to graph this sa aton nga coordinate, rectangular coordinate system. So, -1, -3 is located at the third quadrant. See +5, -3 at the fourth quadrant, and +7, -3 at the fourth quadrant. Okay, so after looking the points, the position sa aton points, we now determine nga position sa aton transverse axis is at the horizontal position. So, nagapahigda ang aton nga transverse axis. So, we are going to use the formula, the quantity x minus h squared over a squared minus the quantity y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. And since, kagina sa definition, since the center, that is the midpoint or the middle point of our vertices, so we can solve for the center by using the midpoint formula, that is x sub 1 plus x sub 2 over 2, and then for the y coordinate, that is y sub 1 plus y sub 2 over 2. So let us substitute to find the hk. So x sub 1 is 5, x sub 2 is -1, y sub 1 is -3, and y sub 2 is -3. Then, simplifying, we have hk is 2, -3. So, aton center is located here at the point 2, -3. Okay, so since each vertex is 3 units from the center, it follows that A is equal to 3. So, again, ang A gani nga units, that is a distance from the center pakadto sa each vertex. So, let's count kung pila ang distance halin sa center pakadto sa aton vertex. So, we have 1, then 2, 3. So, ang distance niya is 3 units. So, it follows that A is equal to 3. Okay, so we can now substitute it to our formula, ang A, which is 3. And then solve for C since given natin focus kagina sa problem. So we have 7, negative 3, and the formula for focus is H plus minus C and then K. Next is solve for C, that is 7 equals H plus C, and then substituting the value of H which is 2. So we have 2 equals 7 equals 2 plus C, and then simplifying we have C equals 5. And now we can solve for B. So we have B squared equals C squared minus A squared. Then the value of C, that is 5, so 5 squared is 25. The value of A is 3, so 3 squared, that is 9. And 25 minus 9, that is 16. So our B squared is equal to 16. So we can write this also in the form the quantity x minus 2 squared. So 3 squared, that is 9, minus y plus 3 squared. So 4 squared, that is 16, equals 1. Equals 1. So by using a graphing calculator, we can graph this. So pwede nyo man siya mag-graph manually by using table of values, or pangitaon yung tanan nga parts ng aton tong hyperbola, the axis of symmetry, the vertex, the foci, the transverse axis, and the conjugate axis. Okay, now let's proceed to the asymptotes of a hyperbola. An asymptote of the graph is a line that the curve approaches as it heads towards infinity. This implies the distance between an asymptote of a graph and the graph itself approaches 0 as they tend to infinity. So kung mag-expand pa niya nga yung graph going to infinity value of x, so approaches man sa aton nga asymptote line. So nagapalapit man ang aton graph sa asymptote line if ang aton nga graph extend going to infinity. So mapalapit lang siya sa aton nga asymptote line, but it will never intersect or it will never overlap to our asymptotes. So nagapalapit lang siya ang aton nga curve or ang aton nga graph sa asymptote lines, but it will never intersect or they will never meet to each other. Next, in the case of a hyperbola, there exist two asymptotes that intersect at its center. They pass through the vertices of a rectangle of dimension 2a by 2b centered at the point hk. So sa aton nga hyperbola, we have always two asymptotes. So we have here. Always ginaya nga to ang asymptotes sa aton nga hyperbola. Okay, so we have here the equations of asymptotes of a hyperbola, which is y equals k plus minus b over a times x minus h when the transverse axis is horizontal. So position sa aton transverse axis is horizontal. And then y minus k plus minus a over b times the quantity x minus h when the transverse axis is vertical. Okay, so example number 2, sketch the hyperbola given the equation 4x squared minus 9y squared equals 36. Determine the equations of its asymptotes. Okay, so let's change the equation into its vertex form. So we divide both sides of the equation by 36 so that may mo na lang siya 1 ang sa right side sa ato niya equation. So we divide it by 36. So 4x squared over 36, simplifying, getting its lowest term, that is 1 over 9. And since 1 times x squared, that is still x squared, so x squared over 9 minus 9y squared over 36, that is y squared over 4, equals 36 divided by 36, that is 1. And we now easily determine that our HK is 0, 0. And solve for A. So since 9 is equivalent to 3 squared, so A there is 3 and B is 2. And you solve for C, that is C equals square root of A squared plus B squared. Solve for C, so C is square root of 13. Okay, so let's solve now the equation for the asymptotes. That is y equals k plus minus b over a times the quantity x minus h. Then you substitute k, which is 0, so you use addition first. Then our b, that is 2, our a is 3, times the quantity x minus our h is 0. Then simplifying, we have y equals 2/3 x. Then you solve also for the minus sign, so we have y equals 0 minus 2/3 times the quantity x minus 0. Simplifying, we have y equals negative 2/3 x. So these are now the equations of our asymptotes. Okay, so by using a graphing calculator, we can now graph our asymptote lines. This is the graph of y equals 2/3 x. And this is the graph of our asymptote line y equals negative 2/3 x. Okay, so para mas easy mag-graph, you can also use a table of values to graph it manually. So sa hyperbola taya, you look all the parts. So you look for the center, its vertex, its focus, and then the other focus also, and vertex and the co-vertices or the endpoints of the conjugate axis. Let's have our last example, number 3. Determine the standard form of the equation of the hyperbola with vertices 1, 2, and 3, 2, and the asymptotes having equations y equals x and y equals 4 negative x, then graph the hyperbola. Since our HK, that is the midpoint of our vertices, so given aton vertices, so we use the midpoint formula in finding the center. So substituting, we have now 2 to our HK. So A is equal to 1, the distance between the center and one of the vertices. The positions of the two vertices implies also that the equation of the hyperbola is in the form the quantity x minus h squared over a squared minus the quantity y minus k squared over b squared is equal to 1. So you look at on the graph, so may sa mga given points ta, and then naman siyang given ng mga asymptote lines. So we can now have the figure in our mind nga ang itsura sa ato na hyperbola is nagapaamo ni siya. Since hari na din ato yung vertex, and then this is our center, and then we have now the asymptote lines. So ginapangita ta is the equation. So asymptotes having y equals x and y equals 4 negative x. So let us recall the slope of a line, which is y equals mx plus b, where m here is the slope. So, okay, the slopes of the two asymptotes are m sub 1 equals 1. So since ang given din nga sa aton yung first equation is y equals x, so the variable here is positive 1. So our slope is positive 1 or m sub 1. And then m sub 2 is negative 1. Since this is in the form y equals b minus mx. So ang m tadio is negative 1. That's why our slope here is negative 1. Suggesting the relation b over a equals 1. Since a, so ang a tato kagina, that is 1, kaya ang distance salin sa center pakadto sa vertex is 1. And then using sa formula to sang aton nga asymptotes, di ba may kita da part sang formula yang b over a So, since aton nga A is 1, and then 1 man ang slope sa isa ta ka isa ta ka asymptote line, so that is suggesting that B is equal to 1 also. Therefore, the equation of the hyperbola in standard form is the quantity x minus 2 squared minus the quantity of y minus 2 squared equals 1. Okay, so that's it. If you have questions, kindly message me to our group chat, and thank you for listening. Keep safe, everyone.